Hope and Healing Canada with artist Tracey-Mae Chambers. My name is Heather Savage. I'm the curator for the Marianne van Silfhout Gallery. Tucked inside the Brockville campus of St. Lawrence College, the Marianne van Silfhout Gallery was made possible by a generous bequest from the estate of Marianne van Silfhout, who was a graduate of the Fine Arts program here at St. Lawrence College. This gift, as well as numerous other donations to the St. Lawrence College Foundation, provides the school, the community, and the region access to thoughtful and educational art exhibits year-round. St. Lawrence College has 3 campuses, one in Brockville, as I've already mentioned, one in Cornwall, and one in Kingston. We were fortunate to have Tracey-Mae create a site-specific installation on each of our campuses in early September. These will remain on display until the end of October. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that St. Lawrence College is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples. We are, and may we always, be grateful to live and learn on these lands. Miigwech. A couple of things to note. If you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please go ahead and type them into the chat. We will moderate a Q&A segment after the presentation for Tracey-Mae to respond to your questions directly. Please also note that we are recording this virtual artist talk so that we can make it available to the school as a resource and also to the public for anyone who was unable to attend today. It is now my pleasure to introduce Tracey-Mae Chambers. Tracey-Mae is an accomplished artist who grew up as a stranger to her own story. At an early age, she was adopted and grafted into a new family tree. In adulthood, the discovery of her Métis heritage was a revelation that set her on a path of discovery, developing her story as an Indigenous heritage woman. Tracey-Mae is deeply committed to decolonization, as can be seen in her ongoing series of site-specific installations across Canada's indoor and outdoor spaces at historical sites, cultural centres, museums, art galleries, and other public spaces. Welcome, Tracey-Mae. I'll now turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Heather and Denise, for helping, and Helena for arranging for this program and helping getting the funding for it, as well as some of her team. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate being able to present at each one of these campuses. It was a wonderful experience, and the support was wonderful by both staff and the reaction from students. So I really appreciate being there. So we're starting the artist talk today. Actually, the photo that you're seeing on your screen now is in Hamilton, Ontario, at the Hamilton Art Gallery. I just wanted to note that before we started on here. So I began this project in May and June of 2021. I wasn't quite sure where to go with my my work. I'm a sculptor by trade, but I just wasn't sure how to deal with the emotions that I was feeling surrounding COVID. But then the first 215 children were discovered. Although I'm not really comfortable with that word, discovered, because there was a fair amount of information that we knew that there are children at each one of these sites. And the other term I have discomfort with is when we just say residential school children, and in fact, I consider them kidnapped children, as opposed to, that the children were surrendered. So I was having trouble trying to figure out how I felt about that and how to express that in my work in a non-confrontational way that was calm and respectful, but broach the larger subject of decolonization and how do we approach one another over such a serious topic. And I think I was feeling hopeless, and COVID was still happening at the same time that this number was released. And I think a lot of people were feeling that these sorts of feelings at the same time. We were all sort of at home, and perhaps that lent itself to the fact that Canadians actually did pay attention to what was happening in the Indigenous realm, which was encouraging that somebody was paying attention. So I decided I wanted to deal with not residential schools specifically, but the act of decolonizing spaces, decolonizing places where settlers generally express their stories, you know, collect archival documents or artwork or any of that kind of thing, or government offices or anything like that. And the reason that I think that something like that has to happen is that those spaces that I work in tend to tell the stories of settlers as opposed to anyone else. And when I say that, I mean Indigenous voices from that community, but also from newcomer communities as well. So when people go into art galleries or museums, they're only seeing, generally speaking, a white Western Europe kind of story, as opposed to the story of the people that were here before and were displaced by those first settlers. So I don't know how, I'm not a you know, somebody who's, you know, highly educated, who's thinking about this in a cerebral kind of way. On a grander scale, institutionally, I don't know how decolonization looks. I only know that I can start the conversation about it. And this is the way that I figured out that I could do that. I chose the color red, and I chose yarn because it's pretty hard to get angry with somebody over yarn. Like I can't make anything that's really going to piss you off that badly, am I? And almost everyone has a pretty good story about yarn. Their grandmother made them something hideous when they were a child, or their mother made them something that was itchy or whatever. But no matter what you wear, you wore those things because you loved that person, or you were made to, in my own case. But in other cases, I'm sure it was because you loved Aunt Gertie and you wanted to make her happy, so you wore the ugly curling sweater that she made you. So it tends to be a medium that isn't going to immediately cause people distress. So that's why I chose that. Red, on the other hand, can cause distress. It's the color of power, it's the color of passion, it's a racial slur, it's the color of anger, but it's also the color of love. So there's a dichotomy there that made it the right color. Although it's not, I mean, had I been able to choose another color, I would have. You know, I mean, yellow is my favorite color, but I certainly can't make a project about something this important with the color yellow, right? So hence we have red. So I started with my own space. We rented a condo in Hamilton, and that's on the left. So what I did was I took everything out of my living room because I wasn't allowed to, you know, go out and create because we were on lockdown. So my husband was away for a couple of days at his mother's, and this is what he came home to. So, and he's 6'6", I should mention. So not so happy, but it is what it is. I didn't have anywhere else to create. So I took everything out of the living room except the things that I could move myself. So let's say the chairs, the coffee table, the sofa, and that cabinet that's on the left-hand side. Then I put all of that in my kitchen. And then I put back only the things I needed. Only the things I needed. Well, those are the like the furniture. Then I put back the things that were important to me. So there's photographs of my family. There's like family heirlooms of my husband's and of mine. And there's gifts that my children have given me and a couple of pieces of my own work. And that's it. And then I wondered why I had all this. I still had a big pile of stuff. And I wasn't sure why I had all that stuff. So that is an act of decolonization. So I started with that, started with looking at how my own life is colonized. The one on the right-hand side is in the parking garage in our building. It's a new building, so there wasn't very many people living in it. So I was able to use the parking garage. Although I did have people drive by me. Actually, they were racing their cars. It was kind of a tense moment. And I think they must have thought I was some crazy person up in the top floor of this. I thought I was alone up there, but apparently I was not, because they were racing cars in the parking garage. And as people started moving into our building, we noticed that they were all luxury vehicles. We don't drive a luxury vehicle, we're just regular people. So they were all these luxury vehicles. And I just recognized that as part of colonization as well, because it is colonialism, involves capitalism, right? So this need for stuff and to impress everyone and things like that is not an Indigenous worldview. So that's where I started, at my own house. But then I was able to convince some people to let me come and play at their house. So the one on the left is actually the Grimsby Art Gallery. They were very gracious and let me create there. That was one of the first galleries. The one on the right is the Carnegie Art Gallery in Dundas. So traditionally speaking, art galleries are not a comfortable place for most people to go to. Even if you're an artist, going into the AGO, and I love the AGO, I'm not saying anything against the AGO, but it is an intimidating place. And the way the way the art is presented is quite intimidating as well. And when you don't know a lot about art, which I don't, when I walk into a place like AGO, if I like something, I almost feel guilty about liking it. So I know that because I think maybe it's not good or whatever. So I know that other people must feel that as well. Also, places like art galleries, the one on the right-hand side used to be a bank. Well, and what's more intimidating than a bank? I don't know about anybody else, but banks intimidate me. And they hold our lives in their hands most of the time. So this place has a very large steps to go up to it. That's not a welcoming space for an art gallery. People who are marginalized are 100% not going to go into a place like this. So on the left-hand side, the one at the Grimsby Art Gallery, the 3 sticks were there. It was from a children's project, so I was lucky enough to be able to use that. It's hard to tell in the photograph, but it's actually a tornado that I've created in the midst of these trees. I've created this tornado because that's what I feel like I am sometimes. That I whirl in, I'm there for a day, I sort of intervene or create an intervention in that space. But even just an Indigenous person being in a space that's traditionally settler, filled, is adaptive to colonization. So having me there was like a little step towards decolonization. So I'm so blessed that people have opened their spaces to me to be able to do that, to start that conversation. I was also really pleased to be able to work in, this is at Riverbrink Art Gallery in Niagara-on-the-Lake, or I'm sorry, Queenston, near Niagara-on-the-Lake, where I found out that this was an actual battleground. This area was a battleground where Métis and First Nations warriors fought beside the British against the Americans, which I didn't know before. And I think that illustrates how little we learn about our own culture in schools. So that started me thinking about that too. So I was happy to be in this space as well, thinking about colonization. It tends to be that people, if I'm not there, if there's not a didactic to talk about the work, they just see it as a pretty art piece, which I'm totally cool with. I'm fine with that. If they do see a didactic, then they can start to dig into a little bit deeper into what the piece actually means. The one on the left-hand side, I was able to, Parliament Hill let me be there during COVID. That's why you don't see very many people. But they did let me come, and I had a policeman, or I don't know what they are, but some sort of security person with a big gun and whatever with me for the whole day. He was in behind, obviously. I asked him to move his car for the photographs because he was literally right behind me, because essentially it's a protest piece, right? So when I was finished, and this is a 28-foot knit braid, and he said anytime I wanted to come back and protest, I was certainly welcome, which was really kind of nice, actually. Oh, and he went and got me coffee and donuts and things like that, which was great. So, he was open to talk about decolonization and what I was doing and why I was doing it. The photograph on the right-hand side is from the Tom Thompson Gallery in their back little garden, and it's sort of a flower reaching up into the new growth of the tree, but pegged into the ground, into the roots. So that connection between old life and new life, or life that's over and life that's just beginning. So this is actually in Sault Ste. Marie at the Algoma University, where the site of the Shingwauk residential school was. The photographs are of the church that's on site there. It's an Anglican church. The church itself, the building itself was built by settlers in the area as well as the school. But anything that you see within the building itself was built by the students. Most of it was built by the students in the school, the male students in their shop class. I've always found that strange that these kinds of things were taught in residential schools, because those sort of skills are not usable skills in an Indigenous community. There's no like carpenter that's going to be making these kinds of things in an Indigenous community, and no one outside a community, the Indigenous community and settler community, is going to hire an Indigenous man to work at a shop. I'm being general there, but I think like the likelihood is pretty small. So I realize that it's hard to see. This was a hard space to work in for a variety of reasons. One of them being that it was really cold. This is in December, and or the very end of November. I can't remember either one, but it was damn cold. There's no heat in the building. There is electricity, but it's only for little wall sconces, and there's only like 6 of them. So I had to lighten the photograph to be able to show you what I can. What you're seeing in the center, that's coming out of the, that's in front of the stained glass window, that center stained glass window is a large crochet flower. I realize that it's hard to see. I'm also found little Bibles in a box and put them on the way out of the church. And all the Bibles at the front of the church are open. And then I'm just hoping that as those students left that school, that go of some of the pain and the trauma that happened there, and turned over that book to try to move forward with their life. So again, this is a hard place to photograph, and I didn't have a zoom lens on my camera because they're very expensive and I couldn't afford it. So I couldn't get the whole space. So these Bibles go all the way out of the church and down the steps out of the church. But I wasn't able to show that. I'd just like to remind you about the flower because we're going to see it at a couple of other venues as we move forward. One more thing I want to note in this photograph, the red book that you see that's laying on the stairs is actually the document that holds that is the register of the students that are passed while living here. They're in a graveyard adjacent to the church. And I want to point out that those are unmarked graves, as they are in so many places, which is highly distressing to me and to everyone who has a heart, I suppose. It's not an easy place to be at. At Black Creek Pioneer Village, there is a schoolhouse. That particular schoolhouse is one of the templates that Egerton Ryerson created to have as residential schools. When I was there, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to create. I just knew I wanted to create in that room, and Allison was lovely and let me do that. And when I was like walking through the room, I realized how little the chairs were. And that was really upsetting to me because it's such a tiny little person that's in this chair, and they're not there by choice, and they're not there because their children or their parents are sending their children for better education or anything of that nature. They're there because they have to be there. They're forced to be there. And I got kind of really upset at that point, and I created this longhouse over top of them to bring the children back into the longhouse. I recognize that not all Indigenous people are longhouse people, but that's what I was able to build in this space. Hence the reason, there's a longhouse over them. This building is small, so again, it was hard for me to photograph because of the limitations of my camera, and also no electricity. So it was the end of the day, so another problem, right? The front of the classroom is the chair and the desk, which is elevated. And I hung the chair from the stovepipe, just illustrating that that level of privilege, but also, the feeling that that person was so much better, and that the children were inferior to whoever sat in that chair. The tangle that you see in front is crocheted. I didn't do it on site, but I did it beforehand, and that tangle of colonialization that is holding up that person and holding down the people that are below her there, the students that are in the room. This is at the Mohawk Institute, which is Woodland Cultural Center. It's a residential school that was in Brantford, Ontario. In this space, I created this, essentially a tree mirroring the tree that has been there since, like, for a very long time. I'm sorry that I've forgotten how old that tree is, but he's an old tree that has been there a long time and seen all of this. You can see through the tree, the leaves of the tree, to the school itself, the school proper, and the creation that I made. Those I consider them roots, are driven into the ground, and then there's this narrow trunk going up into the tree. But we don't see is there's a little boy up in the tree. He helped me. He was the videographer's son, and he was in the tree the whole day. I'd throw the yarn up to him, he'd tie it where I asked him, and he'd throw it back to me. Whilst he was doing that, he told me how to skin a rabbit. He told me the creation story first, which was lovely. Then he told me how, very detailed, how to skin a rabbit. And I should mention that I'm vegan. And it was a very distressing, I was listening, but it was yucky. But he was a delight, an absolute delight. So it was so nice to be creating there with this child who's free to go to school at a regular school. He's with his parents, you know, and his father's got this great job. He's a videographer, and it was just such a great day. It was the best day I think I've ever had installing. It was such a good day. However, when I came to take it down 3 months later, it was just because that's the kind of luck I have. It was the day they were doing the ground penetrating radar. And so if you were standing in front of the school and facing my work, you would have seen them doing that work on the other side of this tree. And so as I'm taking down the work, I'm thinking about the fact that, thank goodness that, you know, I was born in this time, and that this boy was born in this time. Otherwise, he could have been one of those students that was in this school, which was so profound to me, that there was this generational thing, because one of the survivors was running the machine. So you have his generation, what could have been his son, and then his grandson. So I was just thinking about this intergenerational trauma at that point that happened, or that is a result of this space. I'm sure many of you have seen, I always think about sandstone, soapstone sculptures, Inuit sculpture. I've seen it in lots and lots of art galleries across the whole country and into the States. And those kinds of things tend to be, they were purchased for minimal amounts of money, and then sold as part of you know, these galleries for massive amounts of money. And that's changed, not for everybody, but it has changed, not for every gallery, I should note as well. But it's still on my mind, because part of decolonization is not allowing that to happen at all, ever, anywhere, in any community. It doesn't matter if it's in Canada or other places and where there has been colonization. So I was so happy that Craft Ontario let me work here. It was only a day installation. So I built these two, that's 2 windows. I built those 2 in a day, and then photographed them and took them down. I was so disheartened to have to take them down, because I was really pleased with them. But at least I was allowed to be there and create in this space that, generally speaking, work like mine or work of other Indigenous artists would be sold at a high market value, but no market value given to the artist themselves. I want to point out, I get a lot of questions about the fact that the waste of the yarn, or all of the yarn is reused. It's a pain in the ass, because it comes back to me on the left, you see it. And while we're watching baseball, I love baseball, and while we're watching baseball, I roll it back up into what you see on the right. I could just throw it out, but that's not an Indigenous worldview, that's a capitalist worldview, and I'm not a capitalist. So I'm so far to the left, I've fallen off, I think. So I just can't not reuse it. It's not because I'm cheap. My son says I'm cheap, but that's not what it is. I just can't. And also, I want the pieces to carry the stories as it crosses Canada and crosses the United States. So each one of these places has a story that I've written down, has things that happened at it, positive or negative. And I write those things down, and those are the things that we'll use in the book to, you know, show the progress across the country and show what's happening in that gallery or community towards decolonization. Or if they're not moving towards decolonization, and there's a lot of pushback in some communities. So yeah, so I know it's implausible, but I really do reuse the yarn, and I can illustrate that later to you. So on the left-hand side is in Quebec City. This is one half of an installation that's 4 stories in the air above Place Royale in Quebec City. So this is 32 feet by 14 feet wide times 2. So there's another part further down. And this is around the corner from an Anglican, or I'm sorry, a Catholic church. And I mean, I don't need to tell you the relationship between Catholicism and residential schools. So it was so wonderful. They asked me specifically to create in this space because of that. And there's a didactic there explaining that. And I hope people get it when they go to see it, when they are seeing it. Like how the Catholic Church's involvement in residential schools made a massive detrimental effect on Indigenous people in Canada. The photograph on the right is actually from the Brockville campus of the St. Lawrence College. And the pieces that you see there, those tiers were used at the Indigenous Biennale in Montreal. So they were tiers in that installation. And in this installation, to me, they actually look like canoes. And yes, so, and that's what they are. To me, that's what they are. They're canoes, but they represent something different to everyone, just like any other piece or artistic piece that someone makes. And then the sun or the moon in the background. I just like that sort of ethereal feeling of this installation in this particular space. And I'm so happy that museums are embracing decolonization by updating their narrative. In some of the spaces that I've been in, they're wonderful people, absolutely wonderful. I've never met a person in a museum that I didn't like, or a person in an art gallery that I didn't like. I am so blessed by the people that I'm able to work with. So the one on the left-hand side is the Stouffville Museum, and the one on the right-hand side is the St. Mary's Museum. And wonderful spaces trying to adjust the narrative to include other voices, given that the people around them in their communities are not necessarily white, for one thing, not necessarily British, you know, expats. They're not necessarily the original colonizer of this country. They are settlers of a new kind. So they want to speak to them as well about residential schools and what happened in Canada and the genocide that's right here on this soil. So I give great kudos to those kinds of places that are able to do that, willing to do that, even though that's a difficult conversation. One thing that I did notice at one of the places is that they just redone all the little cards that go with their artifacts. But in every one of the cards, when it described Indigenous peoples and their traditions or whatever what it is, the past tense was used. So it would say, I don't want to be specific because I don't want to identify where this is, but Indigenous people in this area were avid hunters and trappers, or they their community was, but it's always a past tense, even though those things are currently important in Indigenous communities. So I was concerned with that. I was concerned that that was part of that narrative, and they hadn't even noticed it, and that's not their fault. You do the same thing over and over again all the time. You can't help but not notice things. We all do that. It wasn't a conscious decision to be unkind or to be dismissive. It was a mistake that they didn't notice and do now. I'm so sorry. I hope you can't hear that. That's some sort of construction is happening in the apartment above mine. So I'm sorry. the flower that we had seen in Shingwauk was, I actually reused it at 2 other spaces. One of them was in Quebec City at that installation that's below, or that you see high above the street level. And it was also used at the Macintosh Art Gallery at Western University. Hopefully that'll get rid of that.
Yes, so that piece, that flower that you see, has been reused at 3 different spaces, and when it comes back to me, it'll be reused at another space across Canada, which is incredibly important to me. So the work is 100% is reused. The connection between us is a tangible thing. So to me, each one of these represents the weaving within the center represents family. It represents, the people that are closest to you, and then the strings that head out to the outer part of that circle are actually, the acquaintances and people that we are further away from. And then there's maybe a hard, wall around that. But no matter what, you're still you're still connected to the person next to you. They may be in another building making a lot of noise above your head, but they're part of the global family. And I always try to remember that, as angry as I get sometimes, and I do get incredibly angry sometimes, and incredibly frustrated and incredibly depressed, just like everybody else. But no matter what, we're still all connected. In this instance, this is at the Cambridge Art Gallery, and I made this installation specifically to show shadow. I'd never done that before. I wasn't sure if it was going to work, and I was so pleased that it did, because I wanted to show the shadows of the families. So that will be our ancestors, or it can be interpreted as the ones that haven't come yet. And I think in Indigenous communities, I know in Indigenous communities, we're always thinking about those that have come before, and those are coming ahead of us, the 7 generations that are coming ahead of us or after us. And to me, this specifically, this grouping of families, I wanted to illustrate the before, the after, all of that in one installation. And I hope that was successful and that it's understood by people who see it. Again, so this is the one that is specifically at the Brockville campus that we talked about earlier. This is at the Cornwall campus, and I wanted people to be able to be on the 3 levels and be able to look out into the trees, to be able to look down into the students coming in and out of those doors, and to be able to look at one another through these lenses, essentially. And so that's why I hung them from the ceiling and such, so there were varying views, just like there is with everything. And this is at the Kingston campus. So the photograph on the left-hand side, you're looking up into the trees. This was created in September. The trees, I get tiny little bit had started to change. I'm not sure if they've changed yet, but you'll start to see them change and fall, and then there'll be none left, and then there'll be snow. And that's always exciting to me, is that people are looking at the sky or looking at the trees through an Indigenous lens through the seasons. So hopefully I can convince the Kingston campus to keep it longer so that we can have snow on it. Yes, but also there's 3 that are not in this photograph that actually look at the school or look out into the road. And I wanted people to be able to look at schooling and education through an Indigenous lens as well. And yes, and I understand that colonization is a part of the history of this nation, a part of the history of many nations. But that doesn't mean that we can't respectfully tear down the infrastructure of that institutionalized colonial worldview and start again where everyone's can be included and respected and their voices are heard. And then what will come out of that will be a far more positive place for people to come to school, for people to come to a gallery, and for people to come to a museum or a public space. And that's what I hope is, as Valhalla as that is, I certainly hope that that's something that we can work towards collectively. And I want to thank all three campuses for allowing me to create in their space. And I want to thank everyone who helped to make this project happen here. It's important that it was here, and I appreciate it immensely. You have no idea. And I was so honored to be there. And so I'm going to pass it back over again, and we'll find out if there's any questions, and hopefully none of them are too hard.
Thank you so much, Tracey-Mae, for sharing so many of your different installation sites with us, and as well for your impetus for this stimulating and stunning project. Now we will have a look at some of the questions that came up in the chat. Let's see. Okay, we have a question. How long does it take you to do the installations?
Generally speaking, it's one day. Although I've started to think I need more than one day. Certainly for the one in the gallery space in Brockville, I would have appreciated. I think Heather and I both would have appreciated a second day to work on that particular piece. It was a challenging day, and I'm glad I had help. Generally speaking, I don't have help. I prefer to do it alone because I'm thinking at the time. It may not look like I'm thinking, but I am. I'm trying to sort out what I'm making and why am I making it, so that when I do talks like this, I have an answer for questions about the piece. So it is generally day. So what happens is that the venue sends me photographs of the space that we might potentially use. And then I create something, whether I sew it or crochet it or do whatever I'm going to do for that space. And try to do it in one day. There are some, like the one in Quebec City took 5 for obvious reasons. That's a really big installation. The one at the Museum of Vancouver took 3 days, 4 days. I don't remember, 3 or 4 days. One in Sault Ste. Marie took 2 days. Like, so it really depends on the space. But I try to keep it within one day because I know I'm disrupting the space as well. So I try to get out of the way.
That answers our second question. That was, do you do the installations alone or with a team? So thank you for thank you for sharing that. Another one we have is, has your approach to your installations evolved each time you complete one?
Yes, absolutely. I think the ones that I did at the beginning were less visually interactive, if that makes sense. I don't know. I made that turn up, so let's coin it. Like, if I just make something that's status, if it's just line over and over again, people are just seeing line. They're not seeing through it necessarily. If I create something that's like a lens, they're interacting with the piece. If I make something like the tiers in the space where you are, they're interacting with that because they can see through it and around it and under it and over it. And I think that as I have gone through these installations over this year, that's been incredibly important, just to be able to have it be interactive. As an aside, I'm going to be creating one for a children's museum that's going to be interactive in so much as the children are actually going to be touching it. So that is some kind of exciting for me because I've never done that before. So it's like, okay, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't even know what I'm going to create, but it has to be touchable because it's children. And I was like, oh, absolutely, I can do that. I love a challenge. Yes, I can do that. Absolutely. And then I get off the phone and go, what the hell did I just do? How am I gonna? Yeah, but I will figure it out. And I like that challenge, by the way. I like that little bit of tension. So yeah, so it is. I think it has definitely evolved. I'm not sure. A curator might look at it and think, no, it hasn't evolved. But I'm hoping that it has evolved and become more complicated as well as I've gone along.
That's interesting. And you have a different challenge with each space too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Or tape. Tape can be a challenge,
sure.
right? No matter where I go, sometimes there's little things that go wrong, and at this point you just have to roll with the punches and try to figure it out and move forward, because that's all you can do, right? It's like everything else.
True. We have another question. I didn't hear you mention it, actually. I think we've had conversations about it before. How many installations have you done so far?
As of yesterday, 112.
Wow.
112. So
Okay.
across Canada. So what'll happen is I will be working across the rest of Canada for the rest of this year and part of 2023. I think it's up until about November, and then from November of 2023 until the end of 2024, I will be across the United States. And I'm hoping the project will be finished at that point. I'd like to move forward and start in the book, and I'd really like to sculpt again. My hands are itchy to sculpt. That sounds so stupid. Geez, if we could edit that out, that'd be great, because that sounds so stupid. But literally, my hands are itchy to sculpt. I miss the physicality of touching something. And by the way, it's warm. The wax is warm, so the feeling of that is just luscious and lovely. So I miss sculpting. So hopefully, at the end of 2024, the installation part of this project will be finished, and I can move forward to something else.
Okay, well, that answers our last question. Actually, was how long do you plan to continue this project for? So that's wonderful. It's like you're reading my mind. Thank you.
Is, I know, right? Ooh, yeah.
If there aren't any more questions, just do a little last check here. No, I think that's all. We've got a bunch of thank yous that have come in from different folks that have joined us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that immensely. It's the positive feedback has been amazing, and it really actually silences the negative feedback, because there's been negative things, but it's sort of like squashes them. It nullifies them in my mind. I try, yes, they happened, and yes, I recorded them, sometimes actually physically on camera, recorded them. But it's like we were saying before, the tape thing. You have to figure it out and keep going, because otherwise, I mean, gosh, we'd never get out of bed. Right? If we only listened to the negative stuff, we would never get out of bed. So I just I deal with it and then move forward. So I really appreciate everyone who's got positive feedback, and if you have feedback, email me and talk to me about it, because I love that, and I love interacting with people, specifically about this project. So if you have questions that you think of later, or you want to have chats or whatever, it's easy enough to find me.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracey-Mae, so much for spending time with us today, and thank you for letting us become a part of your journey. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I know we had many St. Lawrence College staff and students join us, also members from the community, including artists and art lovers alike. Thank you for joining us. I would like to acknowledge the Government of Canada's support, specifically to the Department of Canadian Heritage, for funding our 3 installations and for today's artist talk as well, as part of St. Lawrence College's projects and activities in commemoration of the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Also, I would like to personally thank all the folks behind the scenes who helped to make today possible as well. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for coming. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.